Hi, I am Eric Vergidas from Lusofna University, and this is my support video for the study Shades of Red. Let me start by noting that most classic theorists and theories of totalitarianism have held that it is characteristic of such movements, once in power, to follow a preconceived plan regarding the future of the arts in their country. On the one hand, the plan would aim to force artists into a top-down organizational straitjacket. On the other, it would seek to revolutionize the existing cultural offer with little regard for the proclivities, preferences, and agendas of both the artists and the general public. This study seeks to test the validity of that thesis in the case of the Stalinist Soviet Union. Specifically, we investigate whether a coherent plan for a revolutionary subjugation of the arts had been developed within the coalition of forces that rallied around Stalin at the outset and for the most of the duration of the first 5-year plan, that is, during the so-called Cultural Revolution period of 28-31. Then, we investigate how the relationship between the original Stalinist coalition, the emerging Stalinist party state, Soviet artists, and the broader Soviet public evolved during the consolidation period of 32-33. In general terms, we find that, in relevant respects, the conventional view of the relationship between the totalitarian regimes and the arts, if valuable as a first impression framework, does not do full justice to the complexity of the situation in the case of early Stalinism. First, we discover that the coalition of forces supporting the rise of the Stalinists within the Soviet regime was divided from the very beginning over what should lie ahead for artists and the arts in the Soviet Union in both organizational and content-related matters. Namely, the so-called proletarian artists that avidly supported Stalin at the beginning, assuming that his avowed political ideological anti-rightism would translate into artistic matters, and who actively campaigned for the reorganization of the artistic sector as a bundle of monopolies led by their most prominent figures, and empowered to dictate who could be an artist and what would qualify as art within the dictatorship of the proletariat, were at odds with the position of Stalin and most top Stalinists on the matter. Much like Lenin or Trotsky, Stalin considered proletarian art a half-baked concept that, if used as an operative guide for reforming the sector, would disastrously narrow the pool of talented Soviet artists and the popular appeal of Soviet artistic production. Second, we note that the clash between the two positions was a gradual process whose pace was, above all, dictated by the Stalinists' tactical need to preserve support from left-wing Bolsheviks, proletarian artists included, as long as the political struggle against the Bukharinist right was not yet completely over. That explains why, on numerous occasions throughout 28 and 29, Stalin proved remarkably cautious, subdued, and sometimes even accommodating towards the most vocal demands from proletarian artists for political intervention against so-called conventional artists. However, once his position at the apex of the Soviet regime was secured, the dictator did not hesitate to outrightly criticize, condemn, and discard their representatives and their agenda. Third, and finally, without losing sight of the stark imbalance of the forces involved, and hence avoiding any suggestion that genuine negotiations rather than one-sided concessions were at play, we come to highlight how a complex tapestry of mutual accommodation between the Stalinist regime, on one side, and the proclivities, preferences, and agendas of the majority of the producers and consumers of the arts in the Soviet Union, on the other, uh, resulting in organizational forms and policies arguably in most respects more favorable to conventional artists than to proletarian artists, came to define the status quo in the Soviet arts by 32-33, something which our article will spell out in detail. In conclusion, we can say that agenda clashes and contingent political calculations, instead of a single foreordained ideological roadmap, moved forward the development of the approach to the arts within the broad-based Stalinist coalition from 28 through 33. Thank you for watching.